I was clinically dead for 19 minutes. And what I experienced during that time changed my life forever. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a 38-year-old former paramedic turned faith leader from Charleston, South Carolina. Stay with me because what I was shown about fasting, prayer, and the spirit realm could change the way you see everything. And today I'm sharing something that I believe was meant for anyone who's been feeling the pull for something deeper, something real. It was October 17th, 2023. I was halfway through a water fast, something I felt strongly led to do after months of prayer. Fasting wasn't new to me, but this fast, it was different. There was a weight to it, almost like heaven itself was holding its breath. That morning, just before sunrise, I was driving to a small prayer gathering our church held every week. Charleston was covered in a heavy fog, thick, almost unnerving. Worship music filled the car, and I remember feeling an overwhelming closeness to God, like I could almost reach out and touch Him. And then, in one terrible instant, everything shifted. A semi-truck lost control on the slick roads and jackknifed into my lane. I don't even remember the moment of impact, only the sudden silence that followed. According to the emergency team, my heart stopped for 19 minutes. They said it was impossible that I survived. But what they didn't know was that I was more alive during those 19 minutes than I had ever been. Death wasn't the end of my story. It was the doorway to something bigger. The moment the crash happened, I found myself hovering above the wreckage. I could see the flashing lights, hear the sirens, feel the chaos unfolding, but it all seemed distant. And then, it was like I was being pulled upward through a tunnel filled with what I can only describe as living light. The peace I felt is something no human language can capture. It was love in its purest form. When I emerged, I wasn't standing on clouds or looking at pearly gates. I was in a vast, open place, vibrant, alive, more real than anything I'd ever known. And then I heard a voice, not just any voice, a voice that filled every part of me. It was Jesus. He called me by name, Rachel, and said, "I brought you here because there are things my people need to understand." And suddenly I could see it. Lines of fire stretching from the earth up into the heavens. Each line wasn't random. It was created by someone fasting, praying, seeking God's heart. Jesus showed me how true fasting wasn't just a discipline. It was a spiritual act that ripped through barriers of darkness, creating pathways for heaven's power to pour onto earth. He said, "Many underestimate what fasting accomplishes. They see hunger, but I see armies moving." But that was just the beginning of what He wanted me to see. Jesus showed me scenes from history, not the way we learned them in school, but through heaven's eyes. I saw ancient believers who fasted, how their prayers shifted entire kingdoms, even when they never lived to see the results. I watched as the spiritual atmosphere over cities changed, because a few humble people had chosen to fast in secret. It wasn't about being seen by others, it was about being heard in heaven. Then Jesus showed me how when groups fast together, even just a handful, their combined prayers create something like a spiritual earthquake, shaking strongholds and breaking through resistance that prayer alone often couldn't move. I was shown two types of fasting. The first was cold and mechanical, people doing it out of obligation, pride, or to impress others. Those fasts looked thin and weak in the spirit. The second was different, fasting from a heart that genuinely hungered for God, fasting from a place of love and surrender. Those fasts blazed like fire. Jesus said, "It's not the act of fasting that moves heaven, it's the heart behind it." I also saw how fasting refines us internally, almost like tuning an old radio, sharpening our ability to hear heaven's frequency more clearly. Believers who fasted regularly carried a sharper discernment, a deeper authority, a boldness that wasn't loud but couldn't be denied. A few months after my accident, while I was deep in another season of fasting, I collapsed again, this time during prayer in my own home. Doctors called it a sudden cardiac shutdown. Another miracle, another few minutes clinically dead, another meeting with Jesus. This time, His tone was more urgent. He showed me how the seeds planted from my first testimony were already bearing fruit. People beginning to fast again, churches awakening, strongholds cracking open. And then He said something that has burned in my spirit ever since. The battles ahead will not be won by strength of will. They will be won by those willing to fast, pray, and humble themselves. I saw glimpses of coming storms, challenges that would test the faith of many, but I also saw waves of light, believers rising, shining brighter than the darkness around them, because they had been prepared in secret places through fasting and prayer. Jesus made it clear, the days ahead are not ordinary, and ordinary faith won't be enough. He's calling his people back to the deep wells: prayer, fasting, obedience, because it's through these that his power flows most freely. I saw families saved, communities transformed, lives changed, not because of massive platforms or movements, but because small groups of believers fasted and prayed faithfully in secret. Fasting isn't about suffering, it's about surrender. It's about becoming vessels ready to carry his glory into the darkest places. If you're hearing my story right now, it's not an accident. Jesus is inviting you into something deeper, something eternal. Not religion, not rituals, relationship. Fasting isn't about earning his love. You already have it. It's about clearing away the noise so you can hear his heart more clearly. It's about preparing for the days ahead with boldness, not fear. The question isn't whether he's calling. The real question is, will you answer? The time is now. He's waiting for you.